With every new year comes a new generation of Samsung smartphones, and that's not just true of the expensive flagship models. It releases lots of mid-range devices as well, which are equally impressive in their own right, even if they don't garner as much attention as the S series. For 2022, Samsung has sent out the Galaxy A53 5G to do battle in the highly competitive mid-range smartphone market. So, how does it fare? I'm Cam Bunton from Pocket-lint, and in this review I'll tell you. And while you're here, if you do like it, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe and tap the notification bell to make sure you don't miss any more. Now, at first glance, there isn't a great deal of difference between the Samsung Galaxy A53 and the A52 or A52s from 2021. That's not necessarily a mark against it, however. This is a good looking phone, especially in the pure matte white version of our test unit. It looks great from the back. And while it doesn't offer premium materials that you'll find on Samsung's higher placed devices, there's a great feel to the matte rear. We like that moulding around the cameras particularly, which is something that's also present in the slightly lower placed Galaxy A53 that launched alongside it. Now, when you hear that a phone is built from plastic, there's perhaps a niggling fear that it might feel cheap and shoddy, but the A53 definitely does not. There's no real give in the rear surface, and the phone's frame feels quite sturdy. This feeling is backed up by some strong durability specifications too. Namely, the phone features IP67 water and dust resistance, which is only a tiny step below the top IP68 rating that you'll find in the premium models. The only thing that goes against it slightly is the shape. Like the new S22 models for this year, it's completely flat on the front and the back, with no curves. It's not entirely uncomfortable, the slight rounding on the edges does help, but it's not as palm-friendly as some of the older models with curved backs. Now, while much of this phone is the same as the 2021 model, you might have noticed there's now no 3.5mm headphone socket. That wouldn't raise any eyebrows at the top end of the market, but with the mid-range market often providing as many practicalities as possible, it's perhaps a strange omission. Though you'll undoubtedly be happy to know it does have a micro SD card slot in the SIM tray. Now, apart from materials, the other main difference between the A53 and the more expensive models is the feedback from the vibration motor when you're typing or interacting with the phone. It's a lot more buzzy and less subtle than the haptic motors you find in top-level smartphones. Moving on to the display, and slap bang on the front of this phone is a 6.5-inch AMOLED panel. As you'd expect then, it appears to have plenty of vibrancy in those colours and deep blacks. It's one of those features that makes it a really appealing phone in this price range. Having a bright, colourful screen with relatively skinny bezels means you get a display experience with very few compromises, even compared to the much more expensive Galaxy S22 Plus. Look closely, of course, and you will see that there's a subtle refinement when it comes to colours on the more expensive model. You get a wider colour spectrum and dynamic range, for instance, but looking at it every day at arm's length though, you'd be hard pushed to see that difference at a glance. The resolution sticks to Full HD Plus or 2400 by 1080 pixels, and that's typical for a device in this position. It also offers 120Hz refresh rates, so it'll be able to smooth out fast-moving content and give you a better experience. Now, this smooth experience isn't always consistent. It does sometimes seem to take a couple of seconds to kick in. For instance, when you're scrolling up and down the settings list or swiping through the pages of apps in the app drawer, it's lovely and smooth. But when we were transitioning between the home screen and other layers, such as dragging down the notifications shade or swiping out from an app, we saw some noticeable stutter kicking in. Moving on to the performance and the battery life, and for 2022 the Galaxy A53 makes a bit of a departure from last year, with new Exynos hardware. Samsung's headline here is that this is the first time that 5nm architecture has been used in a Galaxy A series phone, an indicator that it's not being held back. That means it's more efficient and able to deliver its performance with lower power consumption. Samsung claims that this new Exynos 1280 gives a boost over the previous hardware used. It's paired with 6GB of RAM, although there's the option to allocate some of the storage as virtual RAM, up to an additional 6GB. Now, while it isn't lightning quick in real everyday use, it does offer the kind of performance and speed that you need to get things done. It doesn't really struggle with much at all. And while not as responsive as a top-tier phone, it's not slow, and so doesn't hinder you in any significant way. What's more, it'll load up pretty much any game or app you throw at it without much complaint. You don't always get the sharpest of resolutions when loading up some of the more intense games, but it sacrifices detail in favour of responsive and smooth gameplay, which we feel is the right way to prioritise things. There's also a 5000 mAh battery with support for 25-watt wired charging. That's a generous capacity and increase over the previous version of this phone. And as we suspected, this led to some seriously good performance from the battery. On lighter days with 2 or 3 hours of basic use and mostly social media and web browsing, we could finish a day with more than 50% left over. Software-wise, it launches on Android 12 with Samsung's One UI over the top, and there's a promise of 4 years of OS updates and 5 years of security patches. And that's an important distinction in this level of phone, because in the mid-range market there aren't many that can promise that many years of updates. Now let's talk cameras, and on the back of this phone there are 4 of them. It's a quad camera system, but you might want to keep your excitement levels in check when we explain to you exactly how that 4 camera system is made up. As is common in mid-range devices, you have 2 cameras that are worth exploring and using, and 2 that are kind of thrown in to make up the numbers. The main camera has a 64 megapixel sensor and offers optical image stabilization on its lens, and that can help give you a clean, sharp image over longer exposures or when you're using handheld photographs. There's also night mode on this phone, something that some other budget phones miss out on, like the iPhone SE for this year. It's a decent enough camera too, offering pictures with good sharpness and depth, and it can produce good looking images that you'd be more than happy to throw on social media. It does tend to over-egg the colours quite a lot though, even more than Samsung is usually known for. We had a number of different daytime shots where colours were just extremely saturated, giving a hyper-real look to the image. Now there's no optical zoom on this phone, with Samsung instead suggesting you might crop into a full resolution 64 megapixel shot. Otherwise you're looking at digital zooming, which is okay up to a point. At 2 times you get a passable image, but the quality drops off significantly after that. Now as for the ultra-wide, that has a 12 megapixel sensor. And we've always been fond of ultra-wide, ever since LG pushed this on phones 5 years ago. It's perhaps sad then that this ultra-wide doesn't deliver results that quite match the main camera. While it would perform fine on some occasions, it would also get exposure and highlights completely wrong other times, leaving us with a very washed out image with weird colours. As we've seen from other ultra-wide lenses in the past too, the distortion around the edges can be really heavy. That means results look noticeably different to the results from the primary camera. So how about those other 2 lenses? And we've pretty much said this already, they're basically thrown in to make up the numbers. The depth sensor is of questionable value, as plenty of flagship phones produce outstanding bokeh photos without such lenses. It's mostly done by software these days. While the macro lens, similar to other phones, is also a bit underwhelming. With the macro camera, you can get within a few centimeters of an object and get an in-focus shot, but the results aren't amazing. As well as suffering from oversaturated colors, it also creates an unnatural, nauseating depth of field and background blur, and then pushes the contrast up too high. And when you combine that with a sensor that's nowhere near as sharp as the primary or ultra-wide lenses, that means a generally quite poor image. It is more usable than some of the old 2 megapixel macro sensors, but it's still not amazing. If a manufacturer is insistent on providing macro functionality, we'd much rather it be in a better ultra-wide lens which also has macro capabilities, and then ditch the other 2 lenses. Quality over quantity would be better here. So in the end, the A53 does a sterling job of following up from the A52 from last year. In truth, there's no significant improvement here, much like we found with the latest Galaxy S range. However, the A53 is a strong mid-range phone regardless. If you want a modern Samsung experience without the price tag required to get an S22 series phone, the A53 is a no-brainer. It'll get you exactly that, and it does well in all the key areas. If what you value most is a speedy and responsive experience, you might want to look elsewhere outside of the Samsung brand though. I've been Cam, I'm at Cam Bunton on Twitter. If you want to follow me on there, you can do, or reach out to me, or you can use the comments down below. Again, if you did like this video, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe and tap the notification bell, and then you won't miss any more of our uploads. I'll see you again in the next one. Bye for now.